Yeah, as I mentioned this morning, we've presented the introductory program to biblical archaeology. And in that program, we saw how scientific the science of archaeology is. We saw examples of excavations, of digs, how they go about that. So tonight we move in on our first, as it were, proper program. And we're going to do this systematically or chronologically. We're going to start at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis. And in the series, we'll go right through the Old Testament. So tonight, God willing, we're going to cover the book of Genesis and show you examples of findings that confirm the history in that first book of the Bible. I want to start the program by going back around 4,300 years ago to Genesis chapter 10, which records the migrations of the families of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. According to the Bible, Mesopotamia, it's the land occupied by Iraq today, was the cradle of civilization, and the migration started there. This map here is highlighting that particular region. As could be expected, the descendants from Noah's three sons resulted initially in the nations forming into three groups, as depicted here. The European nations came from Japheth, the Middle Eastern nations, including Israel, came from Shem, and the African and other darker-skinned nations came from Ham. The names of some of the nations and places referred to back there in Genesis chapter 10 are confirmed by modern maps and archaeological discoveries. For example, Sidon, a city on the coast of Lebanon, which you can see up the top here, and Gaza on the coast of Palestine down here. They are mentioned there in Genesis chapter 10. Also Elam, which is now called Iran. These names are over 4,000 years old. Genesis 10 verse 8 says, Ham's grandson Nimrod was a mighty hunter and builder and established a kingdom in the land of Shinar, which later became known as Sumer, which is southern Iraq today. His kingdom extended to the north, and the cities he built are mentioned in Genesis 10 verse 10. Now, prior to modern archaeology, critics concluded these names were invented by the Bible and were completely fictitious. This is the printout of Genesis 10 verse 10, telling us the cities built by Nimrod were Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. Archaeology has revealed these names are very historical and were true literal locations. Babel, of course, refers to Babylon, which many didn't believe ever existed until the archaeologists unearthed it at the end of the 19th century. You're looking at just a small section of the site which has been unearthed in this picture. These excavations were not of the city originally built by Nimrod, of course. Babylon was destroyed and rebuilt a number of times on the same site. The Babylon excavated in the 19th century was the one rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar around 600 BC, referred to many times in the Bible, particularly in the book of Daniel, but I'll say more about that in a later program. The city of Akkad has not been found yet, but its historical existence has been confirmed by the inscription on this door socket. I know you can't read it. You'll have to take my word for granted. And this four-sided clay block confirms that the city of Erech existed. It's referred to in the section highlighted by the white square there. Reference is made in Genesis 10 verse 11 to 12 to Asher in northern Mesopotamia, which later developed into the Assyrian Empire, involving the cities of Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, which incidentally later became known as Nimrod. The locality of Assyria in northern Mesopotamia, that's northern Iraq, can be seen on this map, along with some of the cities that are mentioned in Genesis 10 verse 11. For centuries, there was no evidence of these cities, causing some to conclude they never existed, only in the figment of the Bible's imagination. But during the 19th century, explorers noticed man-made mounds and ruins in the northern Iraq, as you see here. In one spectacular decade, in the middle of the 19th century, British and French archaeologists got to work. They ended up unearthing Nineveh, Kala, that's Nimrod, Asher, and Khorsabad. They resurrected a history which confirmed the biblical history relating to those cities. Massive human-headed winged bulls were unearthed from the palaces, which flanked the principal doorways, as demonstrated here in the British Museum. Rooms inside the palaces were still lined with stone carvings and huge reliefs. In one palace alone, there were so many that if they were all put end to end in a row, they would have stretched for a distance of 3 kilometers. Most of the carvings have ancient cuneiform script on them. They're a library, really, a library of stone testifying to the history of the empire. Portraits of kings were also found there, kings who are actually mentioned by name in the Bible. Battles fought by these kings, which are also recorded in the Bible, are also recorded on these ancient stone reliefs, confirming again Bible history. Genesis chapter 11 refers to the building of the Tower of Babel. During excavations at Babylon, where the tower was originally built, the archaeologists found this little cuneiform tablet inscribed with a plan of a 7-stage tower. This drawing is based on the tablet, and it's believed that it represents a tower built in Babylon well after the original one referred to in Genesis 11, but built on the same site and based on the same shape and design. It was a tiered tower, a series of 7 squares rose, one upon another, and Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, said the 7th story was a shrine covered with blue glazed bricks. In 1903, the archaeologists excavating Babylon discovered the tower's foundation. You're actually looking down at it in this aerial picture and can clearly see the outline of the huge square base overgrown with vegetation. According to the tablet, the length and breadth of the foundation were equal with the height of the tower, that is 90 meters, or about 300 feet. The thickness of the brick facing of the tower's base was 15 meters, about 49 feet. It became evident from archaeological excavations that towers, or ziggurats as they were called, were built throughout Mesopotamia as migration took place. You're looking at the remains of one here. Up and down the wide plains, the desert travelers can see the remains of these towering, crumbling brick ruins standing like humps in the desert. One of these brick mounds in southern Mesopotamia was excavated in 1854 by a British team hoping to find ancient monuments and treasure. In those days, archaeology was not the sophisticated science that it is today. Labor gangs were hired to tear the structure apart, starting at the top, working their way down to the bottom. During the demolition process, 4 clay cylinders were found, one in each corner of the top stage of the brick mound. They were covered all over with wedge-shaped scratches. It was ancient Mesopotamian writing, which became known as cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped, but nobody could read it. So they were sent back to London. I actually sent to the British Museum and asked for a photo of one of those barrel cylinders, and this is it on the screen. Actually, the most expensive of all my pictures. There was no internet in those days when I put these programs together. That's why I had to send for it. The cylinder is just over 10 centimeters, about 4 inches long by 4.8 centimeters. It's about 1 3/4 inches, and it's covered with 60 lines of writing. The cylinders were put away out of sight in a cupboard in the museum, which you see in this picture. And it was not until 75 years later, notice that 75 years later, in the early 20th century, after the code for the cuneiform writing had been cracked, that they could finally be read. The breakthrough in deciphering the cuneiform resulted from a great cliff in Iran, known as the Rock of Behestan, seen on the screen at the moment. I actually referred to this in the introductory program, and I just want to make brief reference to it again. Figures of men were carved into the cliff face by the Persian king Darius I in the 5th century BC to commemorate his victories. And all around the figures, the rock face has been made smooth and inscribed with writing. It turned out the inscriptions were in 3 different languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, that is cuneiform. After many years of work, Henry Rawlinson discovered the inscriptions were trilingual, that is, saying the same thing in 3 different languages. Being able to decipher the Old Persian script made it possible to decipher the cuneiform script. So at last, those strange-looking wedge-shaped letters could be deciphered. Some very significant information was found on the cylinder. The name of the place was given where the tower was situated on which they were found, as well as the name of the king who originally built it and the name of another king who carried out restoration work on it. The most significant part of the message has been superimposed on the cylinder here. The place where the brick structure sat was at Ur. The king who originally built it was Naamu, and Nabonidus was a later king who restored it. This map highlights the position of Ur, in case anybody was wondering where it was. And this picture was taken after excavation had taken, completely demolishing the mound. On the basis of the ruins of the mound, this is what the tiered temple originally looked like. Basically, a smaller version of the Tower of Babylon. The message on the cylinders hit the newspaper headlines around the world at the time because the Bible states in Genesis 11 that prior to migrating to Palestine, Abraham lived at a place called Ur. But because the name Ur was never found in secular history or the records, critics and skeptics claimed there was no such place, and the whole Abraham story was just a myth, and the references to it in the Bible were totally unreliable. Since the discovery of the clay cylinders, the name Ur has cropped up many times as a result of excavating the site of the city of Ur, which surrounded the ziggurat. Several stills like this one were found, depicting the king of Ur seated upon a throne. The tablet being examined here also refers to Ur. The name Ur came up again on this stone plaque. On this ancient four-sided block in the old cuneiform script is a list of kings who all reigned in Ur. The inscription on this stone, it's a door socket, has been dated back to around 2300 BC, and it also refers to Ur. And this copper figurine dates back to the same period, and the inscription on it refers to Ur. During the process of excavating the city of Ur, a cemetery was found containing hundreds of graves. Then quite a sensational discovery was made. 16 great burial pits like this one, containing burial chambers made of brick, were unearthed. They were royal tombs, over 4,000 years old. This one here belonged to the great King Ur-Naamu himself. Archaeology has revealed that for a brief period in Sumerian history, it was a custom for members of the king's household to be buried alongside the vault of the king. They died after drinking poison. In some of the royal pits, 60 to 80 skeletons were found, and the remains of asses, oxen, and wagons. Many artifacts were found, including musicians' decorative harps with bulls' heads. Here's one after it was restored. The lyre is first mentioned in Genesis 4, verse 21, 8 generations after Adam. But Bible critics used to claim it was false. They maintained that such musical instruments were not invented till around 1000 BC. But the lyres found at Ur, dating back to well over 1000 BC, disproved that and confirmed the biblical account. But coming back to Abraham, Genesis 11 to 12 tells us that he migrated from Ur to Canaan. As indicated on this map, the journey involved two main stages. Ur to Haran in Syria was the first stage, and Haran to Canaan was the second stage. During the first leg of the journey, Abraham would have followed the river Euphrates. For 2,000 years, Mesopotamia had been the center of Bible history, but the focus was about to be on the land of Canaan. Abraham's journey would have taken him past Babylon and Mari, a place called Mari, where the black arrow is pointing. But up until the 1930s, it was not known that such a place as Mari ever existed. Archaeological digging started in earnest in 1933, and ancient tablets were found dating back to 2300 BC. One of them stated that Mari was the 10th city to be formed after the flood, bearing witness to the great flood of Noah's day. In the royal archives of the palace, nearly 24,000 clay tablets were found, inscribed with all sorts of messages. Among them were messages from Ur, confirming again that such a city once existed. Frequent references were found to the cities of Haran, Nahor, Serach, Peleg, and Terah, names and places mentioned in Genesis which were once regarded as unhistorical. Even the name Abram appears on some of the tablets, along with other biblical names such as Ru, Terah, and Nahor. I'm not suggesting that they're the same men referred to by the same names in the Bible, but it does prove, doesn't it, that they were real names in those days, and the Bible didn't just make it up as it went along. It used to be contended that certain customs recorded in the Bible were not true, but they've all been confirmed by the ancient tablets. Moving on from Mari, we come to a place called Ibla in northwest Syria, seen in red up here. As in the case of Mari, it was not known that such a place ever existed until it was unearthed in 1964 by the archaeologists. Ibla has been referred to as an archaeological jackpot. It was once the capital city of a completely forgotten empire that in fact rivaled Egypt and Assyria. Extensive excavation took place there and many tablets were found. The language written on the tablets was the oldest Semitic language known, from which other related languages such as Hebrew came, in which most of our Old Testament was written. This was quite significant because it was previously argued that the Hebrew language didn't originate until well over 1,000 years later. For this reason, critics argued that Moses could not possibly have written the laws of God because the Hebrew alphabet had not been developed at that stage. Some even argued that the art of writing hadn't been learned at that time in history. But the discoveries at Ibla and Mari revealed that the Hebrew alphabet existed hundreds of years before Moses. So the references in the Bible to Moses being able to write around 1500 BC were confirmed by the tablets found at Ibla and Mari. In 1976, the jackpot room was found here in what was originally a large library, the Royal Archives actually. Over 15,000 cuneiform tablets were found here containing massive information. The Ibla tablets list more than 5,000 geographic names, including the names of cities referred to in the Bible, which critics used to claim never ever existed. Waves of excitement were sent through the world of biblical scholarship when reference was found on a particular tablet to Sodom and Gomorrah. Ibla traded with these and other cities in the Dead Sea region. Critics used to deny that these cities in the Dead Sea region ever existed, but they're mentioned in the Ibla tablets. This was the first time that the names of Sodom and Gomorrah had been found outside the Bible. Time magazine, October the 18th, 1976, in discussing the discovery of the names and places on the Ibla tablets, made this comment, quote, "They provide the best evidence to date that some of the people described in the Old Testament actually existed," end of quote. Okay, Abraham eventually headed south to Canaan. Genesis 12 verse 6 says he went to Shechem, Bethel, and Hebron, shown on this map. These towns are well known today and have been excavated, and the findings date back beyond Abraham's time. Genesis 12 verse 10 tells us that as a result of famine in the land of Canaan, Abraham went to Egypt for relief. It was once argued that this was not possible at that particular time due to a closed door policy of the Egyptians. However, this wall painting, which decorates the tomb of an Egyptian prince and which dates back to Abraham's time, depicts a Semitic family visiting Egypt and gives a visual description of how Abraham and his clan could have appeared. Eventually, Abraham returned to Canaan, where God reaffirmed his promise to give the land to him and his seed as an everlasting possession. Eventually, very late in life, Abraham and his wife Sarah had a son who they named Isaac. Abraham was old enough to be his grandfather. Afterwards, Abraham moved back to Beersheba, where his servants dug a well. This one here that you're looking at dates back to Abraham's time and could very well have been dug by his servants. Genesis 23 records the death of Abraham's wife Sarah, tells us that Abraham purchased a field and a cave in Hebron for a burial site, and eventually he, his son Isaac, his wife Rebekah, as well as their son Jacob and his wife Leah, a total of 6 people, were all buried in that cave. Abraham's purchase of the cave and field is remarkably confirmed by this relief of Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt. 1,000 years after Abraham, Shishak invaded Israel and he conquered many towns and localities. And the name of each one is inscribed on the relief. And would you believe it? One of them is actually named the Field of Abraham. There is definitely a cave there, and this is a picture of the entrance. It's normally sealed. And this picture here is taken on the inside of that cave, looking out. For some centuries, this Muslim mosque has stood on the site over the cave. The outer structure was originally a fortress built by Herod. This ornate cupola stands over a great covered hole in the floor above the cave, and stairs lead down from it into the cave. Inside the mosque itself are 6 cenotaphs, that is symbolic tombs, for a memorial of the 6 patriarchs who were originally buried in the cave. This is Abraham's cenotaph. Monks in the past inhabited the building when it was used as a church during the Crusader period. They claimed to have discovered the actual remains of the patriarchs on the 7th of July, 1119, in the cave underneath, but there's no sign of them today. The Muslims, who have a high regard for Abraham, have set up a shrine in the cave, and a service was taking place when this picture was taken. It was during Abraham's time that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, situated in the Dead Sea region, seen here, were destroyed. Prior to the destruction, Abraham's nephew Lot had moved into the area in the Jordan Valley, also seen here, for the whole region was well watered and very fertile. Genesis 19 says Sodom and Gomorrah and other cities in the area were destroyed by fire and brimstone, that's sulfur, raining down on them, which implies a volcanic eruption. Reference is also made in Genesis 19 to Abraham, who lived up in the hill country to the north, seeing smoke belching forth from the region. Modern scientific research made by geologists and archaeologists have confirmed the biblical account. For example, Genesis 14 says there were many bitumen pits in the region. Professor Emerson, an eminent geologist, described the region as one where sulfur is abundant and bitumen oozes from crevices of the rocks. Every earthquake dislodges sheets of it from the bottom of the lake. There is oil there too, but not enough to work commercially. So it's quite a volatile area. In such rock formations, pent-up gases collect with the risk of explosion. When this occurs, the burning sulfur is thrown high into the air, causing it to rain down, as the Bible describes it, burning brimstone. The boiling asphalt would, of course, create a smoke, like the smoke of a furnace, as it is aptly described in Genesis chapter 19. The Dead Sea region is part of a huge fracture, that is, fault line in the earth's crust, and the destruction of Sodom could easily be caused by a divinely timed earthquake. An earthquake which opened up cracks in the strata, releasing volatile gases and materials, causing an enormous explosion and conflagration. The almighty upheaval altered the contours and conditions of the land over a huge area, transforming it from a fertile region to a barren, desolate region. Salt-encrusted cliffs rise from the desolate shores of the Dead Sea, causing strange forms to be eroded, including pillars like the one at the top of this picture, which is called Lot's wife. Genesis 19 verse 26 says, Lot's wife became a pillar of salt. Instead of fleeing out of Sodom with her family, she went back to the city and became engulfed and encrusted with salt, which was flung into the air. Due to the very high salt content of the Dead Sea, salt clusters such as these form, especially at the southern end of the sea where it's shallow. In quick succession, without any comment, I'll show you some. Many archaeological explorations have been made in the area of the Dead Sea. Professor Albright discovered a large cemetery at a place called Babedra. You can see it on this map just east of the peninsula that extends into the Dead Sea, where the red arrow is pointing there. Pottery found in the area caused Professor Albright to date the site from 2300 to 1900 BC, which encompasses the period of Abraham and Lot. Excavations were conducted on the site between 1965 and 1967. The cemetery involved about 20,000 tombs containing 500,000 persons, one of the largest burial grounds in the ancient Near East. This would warrant a city or cities somewhere in the region with a very large population. But the many dwellings necessary for such a population have literally vanished. They're either buried under mountains of rock and salt or under the Dead Sea itself. Evidence in the region indicated the site had come to a fiery end. One site was covered with a mantle of ash. In some places, the ash was almost 1.5 meters, that's 5 feet thick. Seeing these ashes calls to mind a statement made in the Bible in 2 Peter 2 verse 6, that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were turned into ashes. One of the shortest verses in the Bible is a statement made by Jesus. He said, "Remember Lot's wife," just 3 words. She turned back, as we know, from pursuing the path that led to her salvation, because she could not turn her back on the sinful city of Sodom, and we think concluded that there was no destruction coming. Jesus also said that as it was in the days of Lot, that is, in the days of Sodom, even so will it be when the Son of Man, that is himself, is revealed, that is, at his second coming. The implication of the statement of Jesus clearly is there will be rampant ungodliness and immorality in the end time, resulting in fiery destruction. The Apostle Peter put it like this: "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens will pass away with a great noise. The elements shall melt with intense heat. The earth also and the works that are in it shall be burned up. Seeing then all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought we to be in all holy conversation and godliness?" This map, which we saw before, shows 5 sites which have been discovered in the southern Dead Sea area. Whether or not they are the sites of the 5 cities mentioned in Genesis is not certain. Other sites may await discovery. But one thing is certain, the ruins of the 5 settlements discovered do date back to the era of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Since the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the environment of the Dead Sea region has been too forbidding for human settlement. Where thriving and popular cities and settlements once existed back in Abraham's day, all disappeared for nearly 4,000 years, right up to the 20th century. In the lowest region of the Dead Sea area, temperatures can rise above 125 degrees Fahrenheit. The excessive heat and low rainfall, resulting in extreme barrenness, kept settlers away for centuries. Only small groups of roaming Bedouin had dwelt in the region. In view of this, a prophecy in the book of Ezekiel chapter 16 is very interesting. It declares that when God gathers the Jews back to their homeland and restores them in the end time, he will also restore and repopulate the region of Sodom, that is the Dead Sea region. The extent to which the restoration has taken place since Israel's return to the land is evident in the many tourist resorts, such as this one, that now occupy this most inhospitable part of the land. The Dead Sea is a major attraction due to the water having 9 times the salt concentration that ocean water has. This makes the water extraordinarily buoyant, enabling people to sit or lie on its surface and float with ease. It's this novelty which attracts many tourists and accounts for many resorts in the area. The Dead Sea region has truly been restored and repopulated as was predicted by the Bible. Dead Sea salts are being extracted in large quantities, turned into potash, used in Israel's fertilizer and glass industries. Convicts were once offered parole to work in this hot, hostile, oppressive environment, which is 425 meters below sea level, the lowest place on the planet. In view of Bible prophecy stating that Sodom would be restored, it's truly significant that the name now appears on modern maps just south of the bottom area of the Dead Sea. Down here, there it is, Sodom. The Israeli potash plant in Sodom is the 4th largest producer and supplier of potash products. The company also produces magnesium chloride, industrial salts, de-icers, bath salts, and table salts. Also bromine, used in dyes, pharmaceuticals, and gasoline. It has customers in over 60 countries throughout the world. Rather than extracting potash and other minerals from the Dead Sea by mining them directly, the company makes use of solar energy with 2-meter deep evaporation ponds, which you see here. Here's an aerial view of the network of dikes which form the shallow ponds. They cover an area of about 100 square kilometers. That's about 40 square miles. The pools evaporate quickly, resulting in raw materials containing salt being deposited there to produce potash, etc. Another attraction at the Dead Sea is the dark phosphorus paste, which is supposed to work wonders in relieving rheumatic pain, among other things. And who knows, it might even shrink the skin and take some wrinkles away and beautify the complexion, or maybe even reduce middle-age spread. Having covered the life and time of Abraham, we turn now to his son Isaac. Genesis 25 says Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob remained in the promised land. Esau migrated to the territory south of the Dead Sea. At the time, it was called Mount Seir, but was changed to Edom. You can see the yellow section at the bottom of the map. It's a very rugged mountainous area with peaks rising to over 1,000 meters, about 3,500 feet. It belongs to Jordan today. Looking at the maze of mountainous peaks and ravines from the air, there would seem to be no path by which anybody could pass through. It's even more difficult to believe that cities could be built there or that people would even want to live there. Yet, the Bible in Isaiah 34, Obadiah verse 3 to 4, Jeremiah chapter 49 says the Edomites, that's Esau's descendants, lived there. It says they built cities there and made dwellings up in the mountains and up in the clefts of the rock. Well, that's what the Bible says. But up until the 19th century, before Europeans ever explored the area, many believed again that the references in the Bible were fictional, not historically factual. But hidden away in the great folds of the mountains lay one of the world's most rare and beautiful spectacles. I'm referring to the ancient rock-carved city of Petra, part of which we're looking down upon here. Scientist Julian Huxley said it should be made a star exhibit in a museum of world wonders. And I believe it's a good exhibit, again, to the truth of Bible history. The position of Petra can be seen on this map, halfway between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. Vital trade routes passed through the area in ancient times, as indicated by the red lines on this map. In her heyday, Petra was involved in a very, very lucrative trade. In fulfillment of Bible prophecy, the Edomites were invaded and evicted as a result of becoming anti-Israel. One of those prophecies was in Obadiah, verse 13 to 14, which is superimposed on the treasury here, which is at Petra. The city of Petra was eventually abandoned to the mountains and forgotten beneath a shroud of sand and dust right up until the 19th century. During the centuries, vague tales were told of a unique gorge somewhere in the Arabian wilderness. It was a gorge which led into an amazing city where dwellings were carved out of rock, somewhere between the Dead Sea and the Red Sea. Many rejected these stories as being mere folklore. The few adventurers who set out to investigate the claims never returned. It was finally discovered to be true in 1812 by this Swiss explorer, Johann Burckhardt. He's seen here in an artist's impression of him discovering it. Petra was explored by others later, and of course, it became a great tourist attraction. To get into the city of Petra involved entering a narrow cleft in a rock wall, as you see here, and follow a narrow gorge which penetrates the mountains. This gorge was the only way into the city, and it twists and turns between the cliffs for about 1.2 kilometers. The sandstone cliffs rise up to 100 meters, that is over 300 feet. In some places, the track narrows down to just a few meters wide, where the sides almost touch. A man with outstretched arms could, in fact, almost touch the walls on both sides in some places. Without comment, I'll show you some more pictures taken as you walk through the gorge. As one progresses along the gorge, gets towards the end, daylight appears through a narrow gap in the rocky passageway. Nearing the end of the gorge, it becomes evident that a tall, ornate building lies ahead. Not built of wood or bricks, no, carved out of the very rock face itself. Here it is. It's called the Treasury, and it's completely carved out of the face of the sandstone cliff. The area from the Treasury widens out to areas where there are numerous tombs and dwellings and some temples carved out of the mountains. In the next selection of pictures, I'll quickly scan some rock faces and show you some more rock dwellings and tombs. Petra's main street ran through the center of the city, as you see here. It was known as a colonnaded street, being originally bordered on each side by tall pillars. There was even an amphitheatre at Petra, all carved out of the sandstone. Originally, it could only seat 300 in 11 rows, but it was increased later as a result of Roman occupation. Rows were added, which increased the capacity to over 8,000 seats. Since then, earthquakes have destroyed parts of it. Now, according to the Bible, 2 Kings 14 verse 7, 2 Chronicles chapter 25, the army of Israel on one occasion killed 10,000 Edomites on the battlefield outside of Petra. There were also survivors, and Israel led them captive back into Petra, up to the top of a cliff called the High Place, where the Edomites worship their false gods, and the Israelites threw the men down to their death. The steps leading up to ancient Petra's High Place are still visible today, carved out of rock, as you see here. On the top of the High Place are two obelisks carved out of existing rock. They were symbols of sun worship, very common amongst the ancient pagan nations. A rock-hewn altar is up there also, approached by steps. Some believe it may have been used for human sacrifice during biblical times. And so we could go on. There's a lot to see at Petra, but what we've seen is sufficient to show that Bible history has again been confirmed by the discovery of this city. Coming back to the book of Genesis, to the time of the patriarchs, many events, transactions, and customs recorded there have been confirmed as customs of the day, and they've been confirmed by the ancient tablets. For example, Isaac's deathbed will, which he couldn't change or retract. Also, Jacob's father-in-law's refusal to let his younger daughter Rachel marry before her older sister Leah. In Genesis 33 verse 3, we read about Jacob bowing 7 times before his brother Esau. In one of the ancient tablets, a lesser king wrote to a greater king and said that he bowed 7 times. So it's evident that this was not some foolish act invented by the Bible, but a serious and meaningful custom of the times. Genesis 37 introduces us to the story of Joseph. Jacob had 12 sons, as we know, but he loved and favored Joseph the most, and he made him a coat or robe of many colors. It was not a strange or unusual thing for one living in Canaan to wear such a robe, as a painting on the wall of an ancient Egyptian tomb indicates. There it is. It dates back to the 14th century BC and depicts a man from Canaan wearing a coat consisting of different colors. So they clearly didn't just wear black like the Bedouin of today. Joseph's brothers envied and hated him and cast him into a pit, later sold him as a slave for 20 pieces of silver to a caravan of merchants heading to Egypt. Significantly enough, the tablets have revealed that 20 pieces of silver was the price paid for a slave at that particular time in history. Another point of interest is that Genesis 37 verse 25 says the camels of the merchants were carrying spices and aromatic products down to Egypt. Both archaeology and history testify that there was a heavy demand for these products in Egypt for incense in the temples and for embalming the dead, etc. Joseph was taken away, sold to an Egyptian by the name of Potiphar, and it has been confirmed that Potiphar is a native Egyptian name. It is not a fictitious name invented by the Bible. Genesis 41 verse 14 says that when Joseph eventually stood before Pharaoh's throne, he had to be shaved. Statues and reliefs in Egypt show that while Semitic men like Joseph wore beards, Egyptians were shaven. However, as a sign of royalty, pharaohs wore beards, but no one else. To do so in his presence could be a breach of court etiquette. So the biblical account of shaving Joseph is in harmony with the palace protocol that was practiced at the time. When Joseph was finally appointed Prime Minister of Egypt as a result of interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, Genesis 41 verse 42 says, Pharaoh took the signet ring off his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. The Bible also says that Pharaoh clothed Joseph in a garment of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. The ring would enable Joseph to seal documents and give orders in the name of Pharaoh. The title, wearer of the royal seal, has actually been found on ancient Egyptian inscriptions. Signet rings belonging to Egyptian officials, princes, and noblemen have been found by the dozens, and the British Museum has a fine collection of them, some of which are seen in this picture. Joseph's promotion, as narrated in the Bible, is quite consistent with the protocol of the day. This drawing here of an Egyptian relief depicts Pharaoh sitting on his throne and a gold chain being put around a man who was wearing a linen robe. Egypt's ability to make chains or necklaces can be seen in gold necklaces such as this one, which was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. And fine linen was a special fabric in those days, only worn by people of rank. This painting here of a high-ranking Egyptian official wearing a linen garment dates back to around 1400 BC. In this picture, taken from an Egyptian papyrus dated around 1310 BC, shows an Egyptian couple of noble class dressed in fine linen. Genesis 41 verse 43 says, Pharaoh made Joseph ride in his second chariot, that is, the viceroy's chariot. Genesis 41 also says people were called upon to bow the knee to Joseph as he drove past. The critics used to argue that there were no chariots in Egypt at that time. Again, the Bible does make things up as it goes along. But we now know the Hyksos rulers introduced chariots into Egypt prior to Joseph going there. You're looking at one in this drawing of an ancient Egyptian relief. This one depicts a pharaoh riding through the streets accompanied by runners with spears and sticks, and people can be seen kneeling in homage and clapping their hands. This is the kind of scene Genesis 41 refers to, and it's confirmed by these ancient reliefs. You're looking here at an artificial canal. It's about 120 kilometers, about 80 miles south of Cairo. It's over 320 kilometers, about 200 miles long, and runs parallel to the River Nile. It conveys the water of the Nile to the area, creating a paradise out of the desert. The canal is very ancient, and it is known as Bar Joseph, which means Joseph's canal. It's believed that the Joseph of the Bible, Pharaoh's grand vizier, as Arab legend describes him, could have very well planned that canal. Genesis 41 refers to granaries being built to store grain during the 7 years of plenty predicted by Joseph. They were probably similar to the state granaries seen in this drawing here of an ancient Egyptian relief. Trapdoors can be seen at the bottom to release the grain. These are the ruins of mud brick granaries near the temple of Ramses II. Genesis 41 verse 45 says Pharaoh gave Joseph the name of Zaphnath-Paneah, which puzzled students for years. But an ancient inscription was found which includes and confirms that there was indeed such a title. It is thought to mean Saviour of the world, a rather appropriate title for Joseph, who saved the country from famine, not to mention other countries. When the famine came, Joseph adopted a policy by which the people eventually had to give their land to Pharaoh in exchange for food. But they were allowed to remain on the land and work it and keep 4/5 of the produce for themselves and give the remaining 1/5 to Pharaoh. We read that in Genesis chapter 47. It's now known that for a short time, Egypt was under a feudal system by which the Pharaoh owned all the land while the people worked it and paid 1/5 of the produce to Pharaoh. This system is known to have been in operation during the reign of Sesostris I and II and is believed to be the direct result of Joseph's policy. According to Genesis, the 7 years plenty was, as Joseph predicted, followed by 7 years famine. But this has been questioned because due to having the Nile River, Egypt doesn't depend on rainfall. As seen in the satellite photo, the River Nile is Egypt's source of fertility, and the river's source is hundreds of kilometers upstream at Lake Victoria. However, official inscriptions have been found on this rock on an island at the Nile's first cataract and in tombs in Egypt. The inscriptions refer to failure of the Nile to overflow its banks for 7 years in succession, resulting in famine of exceptional severity. Joseph's family in Canaan were affected by the drought, as we know, and some of the brothers went down to Egypt to produce food. They hadn't seen Joseph for 20 years, didn't recognize him. They bowed before him as his dream had predicted, and eventually his father Jacob and the whole family shifted to Egypt for relief. The possibility of Semites coming to Egypt again was once questioned. But this is one of a number of ancient Egyptian paintings on a tomb wall which supports it. It dates back to the period of the patriarchs and depicts bearded Semites visiting Egypt. And in this relief, a group of Semites, again recognizable by their short beards and long, tightly bound hair, are bowing in the presence of high-ranking Egyptians. Genesis 47 tells us that Pharaoh told Joseph that his family could live in the land of Goshen. As you can see on this map, Goshen lay on the delta to the east of the River Nile. A letter found written on papyrus, written by a frontier official to his superior, informing him that he has permitted refugees from famine-stricken countries to enter Egypt and directed them into the land of Goshen, is interesting in relation to the Israelites being put in that same Goshen region. Various scarabs dating back to Joseph's time have also been found inscribed with Semitic names belonging to officials in Egypt. Among them, the name Jacob has been clearly deciphered. In relation to this, the great American Egyptologist James Henry Breasted, who is seen here, He said this, quote, "It's not impossible that a leader of the Israelite tribe of Jacob gained control for a time in the Nile Valley in this obscure period," end of quote. Excavation has taken place in the area that was Goshen, and archaeologists say it's produced evidence of Semitic occupation during the time of Joseph around 1700 BC. Joseph died at the age of 110 and was embalmed, placed in a coffin and carried out of Egypt by the Israelites several generations later when the Exodus took place under Moses. This raises the question, where was Joseph's coffin kept until taken away at the Exodus? It is believed that Joseph, being Prime Minister of Egypt, would have had a palatial residence in Goshen. On the screen is a model of a residence that excavators unearthed in that area of Goshen. Of particular interest were the remains of a miniature pyramid tomb. This is a drawing of what it originally looked like. The tomb was excavated and found to be empty, but during excavation, the remains of a twice life-size limestone statue were found. Here's a close-up of the head. The statue clearly belonged to the occupant of the tomb, but had been smashed, vandalized. If it was Joseph's, it could have been desecrated after Israel's exodus, when Egypt was humiliated and when the Pharaoh was so anti-Israel. Using computer technology, the shattered remains of the statue have been restored. Remains of a throw stick on the right shoulder were found, which was an insignia of office, the Egyptian hieroglyphic symbol used to denote a foreigner, that is, a non-Egyptian. Pharaohs did not hold a throw stick. They held a crook, that is the hooked staff of a shepherd, and a flail used in agriculture for threshing. These were the Pharaoh's insignia as seen here, not a throw stick. The statue clearly represented a man of foreign origins who had attained high office in Egypt. Wrapped around the statue was a coat of many colors with a simple geometric pattern of stripes and rectangles. It's not difficult to consider the possibility of this statue representing Joseph. And if so, then his humble Semitic origins were unashamedly preserved and memorialized in spite of the high office he had attained in Egypt. And maybe the body of Joseph himself, when laid to rest in the tomb, was dressed like this, waiting to be taken out of Egypt back to the land of his Semitic origin when the Exodus took place under Moses. According to Joshua 24, verse 32, Joseph's bones were buried in Shechem, and for centuries there was a tomb there regarded as the tomb of Joseph. You're looking at an old photo of it as it appeared in the past. As you can see from the red circle in this picture, which encircles the tomb, it is now surrounded by buildings. This is the entrance. People are able to visit it and reflect on the great patriarch that Joseph unquestionably was. Some years ago, the sarcophagus seen here, which contained Joseph's body, was opened and was found to contain a mummified body. And in the tomb, among other things, was a sword of the kind worn by Egyptian officials. The coffin was sealed, covered with a beautiful decorated covering, as you see here. Well, this brings us to the end of the program, which has covered archaeological findings relating to the book of Genesis. There may be others, but I think we've seen enough to get the idea that it's well supported by archaeological research. In the next program, we'll start in the book of Exodus at the time of Moses. We'll follow the Exodus through. We'll go through the Red Sea that they went through and go to the original Sinai in Arabia, and we'll just keep moving forward from there, God willing.